BLEACH. Crimson Kenpachi. Chapter 1. The Boy Who Survived Everything. The outer districts of Rukungai did not teach mercy. They did not teach kindness or law or patience or the quiet faith that tomorrow would resemble today. They taught one lesson, over and over again, until it rooted itself so deeply into the bones that it became instinct. Survive. Nothing else mattered. Not hunger, not dignity, not innocence, not age. Survive. In the distant heart of Seoul society, Serite rose in white elegance behind its walls, immaculate and orderly, a realm of captains and divisions and ancient discipline. But far from those polished streets, far beyond the reach of tidy halls and official justice, the outer districts rotted beneath long years of neglect and fear. There, the ground was always hard. The wind always carried dust. Men looked at one another with the expression of hungry dogs. Children learned quickly or disappeared. And in those districts, where weakness had no right to linger, a boy without a name had lived longer than he should have. No one remembered when he first appeared. Some said he had crawled out of a pile of bodies after a gang fight and simply never left the street that birthed him. Others said he had been the child of drifters who vanished one winter and left him crouched under the shell of a ruined house, half-starved and staring at the snow like it had personally offended him. A few claimed he had always been there, thin and quiet and watchful, like a piece of the district itself that sometimes moved. The truth mattered less than the result. He lived. In a place like that, survival was a form of power. Not the greatest power, not the loudest, but real. The boy never tried to remember a time before fighting because he had never known one. His oldest clear memory was not a face, not a voice, not the warmth of a hand. It was motion. Sudden, ugly motion. A man's arm swinging down toward him with a jagged piece of metal. A curse spat through broken teeth, the smell of sweat and stale blood, and then that cold, immediate understanding flooding through his small body before he had words for it. If that lands, I die. So he moved. That was all. The shard missed his skull by an inch. The man's balance shifted. The boy's fingers found a rock without thinking, and his arm came up with all the force desperation could lend a starving child. There had been a crack, a wet sound. The man had fallen and remained there. The boy had stared at him for a long time, chest heaving, waiting for him to rise. He had not. By sunset, the boy had taken the dead man's food. By nightfall, he had taken his knife. By morning, he had understood the shape of the world. After that, life became a string of narrow escapes tied together by instinct. He learned which streets belonged to which gangs. He learned which old women would let him drink from their buckets if he stood far enough from the door to avoid looking threatening. He learned how to sleep lightly, how to wake at the whisper of movement, how to tell from footsteps whether someone was drunk, angry, or dangerous enough to be both. He learned that a child could vanish in a crowd just as easily as he could be cornered in an alley. He learned that pity was often a mask people wore a moment before taking what little you had. Most of all, he learned how to fight. Not from a teacher, not from any school of swordsmanship. Rukungai had no patience for clean forms and noble philosophies. It taught through pain, repetition, and consequence. He fought older boys over scraps of food. He fought men who saw a small body as easy prey. He fought women who were quicker than the men and meaner because they had learned too well what mercy cost. He fought with rocks, wood, broken bottles, stolen knives, then finally with a sword dull from age and chipped from use, taken from a corpse who no longer needed it. He fought because talking failed too often. He fought because running did not always work. He fought because breath only mattered if he kept it inside his chest. There were years when he barely seemed to grow taller. Hunger narrowed him, stretched him, hardened him without filling him out. His face stayed young longer than his eyes did. He was thin in the way that made strangers underestimate him, and corpses remind one another too late that they'd been foolish. He never smiled much. There had not been many reasons to. He never wasted words either. In the outer districts, people talked when they were buying time or bluffing or trying to convince themselves that violence could still be avoided. The boy had no use for any of that. If someone approached him with a hand near a weapon and anger already rising in their spirit, then words were just weather before the storm. He became known. In the loose, careless way such places gave names to things they feared, without ever truly naming them. That boy, the silent one, the stray with the sword, the ghost-eyed brat. Some swore he did not feel pain. Others whispered that he did not get angry because he was born wrong. A few thought he was touched by some darker thing, some old remnant of violence that had soaked so deeply into those streets it had finally chosen a body to wear. None of them understood the truth. The truth was simpler. He was lonely in a way he could not yet name. He did not think of himself that way. He lacked the softness for it, the language, the luxury. But in the quiet moments, rare, brittle things that appeared at dusk or in the hour before dawn, he sometimes found himself standing over a defeated opponent longer than necessary. Not out of cruelty, not out of triumph, out of disappointment, because even the stronger ones broke eventually. That was the problem. Some died too quickly. Some turned fearful in the middle of the fight, their attacks losing edge, their eyes changing from anger to pleading, as if the realization had finally reached them that this ragged boy was not something they could bully into the ground. Others fled. Others begged. Others cursed and bled and became no different from everyone else before them. No one stayed. No one kept up. No one stood in front of him long enough to make the emptiness in his chest feel less wide. He did not know that this feeling had a shape. He did not know there were warriors elsewhere in Soul Society who had felt echoes of the same thing and given it names like hunger, battle joy, or the sorrow of being strongest. He only knew that each time a fight ended too soon, he felt vaguely irritated afterward, as if the world had once again failed to become interesting, so he fought more. He survived another year, then another. Seasons change without meaning much. Summer baked the streets until dust clung to skin and sweat dried faster than it fell. In winter, cold slipped into broken buildings and curled around sleeping bodies like a second predator. Rain turned alleys into mud and blood into thin red streams that vanished quickly into the earth. The district endured. So did he. By the time his body began to lengthen in earnest, by the time his shoulders settled a little broader and his wrists steadied around the hilt of his stolen sword, the district had stopped seeing him as a child. That made life harder. It also made it clearer. Men who had once dismissed him began approaching with caution. The smart ones came in groups. The prideful ones came alone and died surprised. A few tried to recruit him. They offered food, shelter, a place in their hierarchy. He never accepted. Anything given in Rukungai always came with a hand around your throat eventually. Better to sleep under broken roofs than inside someone else's cage. He lived where he liked, fought when he had to, ate when he could. Protected nothing, belonged nowhere, answered to no one. The district sharpened him, and because there was no one to temper that sharpening, it became something pure and dangerous. He did not realize how unnatural his instincts were becoming. He did not realize that while other fighters relied on training, technique, or rage, he had started to move on something deeper than thought. His body understood angles before his mind named them. His feet found balance on broken stone and slick blood with equal certainty. He could read the tiny shifts in shoulders and hips that revealed a strike before it came. He knew where to cut to end a fight quickly, where to wound without exposing himself, how to move just enough and never more. He learned all of it without ever knowing he was learning. He simply survived. Then one day, survival became routine. That should have been a comfort. Instead, it made the world duller. The district had a long central road broken by age and neglect, wide enough to let people see danger coming from a distance. The boy liked it because ambushes were harder there. On that afternoon, he sat against a crumbling wall with his sword across his knees, and his head tilted back toward a pale sky that looked washed thin by heat. Nearby, a dog gnawed on something he preferred not to identify. Further off, two men argued over ownership of a water bucket with the flat, exhausted hostility of people who had long since forgotten how to be surprised by misery. The boy did not interfere. He almost never interfered. He watched. He listened. He rested. Then a shadow fell over him. He opened his eyes without moving the rest of his body. 3 men stood in front of him. Not local to this stretch, or at least not usually. Their clothes were rough even by district standards, layered in mismatched fabric and old stains. One had a scar cutting through his eyebrow. Another grinned with too many teeth missing. The third stood slightly behind the others with one hand tucked inside his coat, where a weapon likely waited. The leader jerked his chin toward the sword. "Give that to me." The boy looked at the blade across his knees, then back at the man. "No." The answer came flat and unembellished. The men stared for a second, as if insulted less by the refusal than by how little effort had gone into it. Then the one with the missing teeth laughed. "Listen to him." Scar Eyebrow stepped forward. "You think because you've killed a few fools you're untouchable?" The boy rose in one smooth motion. Not dramatic, not sudden. Just upright, sword in hand now, his body settling without conscious thought into readiness. "I think," he said, "you should leave." It was more warning than he usually gave. Something about the heat had made him tired. He did not want to kill them if he could avoid the trouble. They mistook that for mercy. Scar Eyebrow swung first, drawing a short blade from his belt and lunging in with a shout meant to make up for lack of skill. The boy's body moved before the shout finished. Steel flashed. Scar Eyebrow stumbled past him, confusion lingering in his expression for the half-breath it took him to realize his wrist had been opened. His knife dropped. Blood followed. Missing teeth came next with a louder roar and a sloppier angle. The boy pivoted, let the man's weight carry him forward, then drove the flat of his shoulder into the attacker's chest hard enough to throw him off balance. A reverse cut opened his side. Not fatal, deep enough. The third man finally drew the weapon hidden in his coat, a jagged iron spike, and rushed in at the exact wrong moment when the boy's back should have been exposed. Should have. The boy ducked low, turned, and slashed upward. The spike flew from numb fingers. The man screamed and fell to one knee, clutching at a forearm that no longer worked properly. Silence dropped over the street as swiftly as a curtain. Nearby doors cracked open a little wider. 2 children who had been crouched under an awning darted away. The dog with its scrap of meat trotted off, unimpressed. The boy stood in the center of the road and looked at the 3 wounded men. "Leave," he said again. This time they listened. Scar Eyebrow wrapped a hand over his bleeding wrist and staggered backward. Missing teeth, pale now beneath the dirt on his face, hauled himself upright with one hand pressed to his side. The third man recovered his dropped spike with his good hand but did not raise it again. They retreated with the jerky dignity of men trying desperately to look less broken than they felt. The boy watched until they vanished around the bend. Then he sighed. Too easy. He cleaned the blade on his sleeve and sat back down against the wall. The emptiness returned quickly. For a long while he did nothing but stare out at the sun-dulled street. Dust moved. Heat rippled. Life resumed around him in cautious increments, people emerging again now that danger had passed. No one thanked him. No one spoke to him. That was normal. He preferred it that way. Near sunset he wandered farther from the main road, following no plan beyond instinct and habit. He crossed through alleys cut narrow between leaning buildings, stepped over a collapsed fence, and emerged into a smaller district square where a cracked stone basin sat dry in the center. Once, long ago, it might have been a place where people gathered for water or conversation. Now it held only debris and the shadows of those too tired to care what something used to be. The boy paused. A body lay near the basin. Fresh. The man's throat had been cut in one clean line, no signs of panic, no sign of a struggle. The kill was neat enough to feel almost disrespectful in a district that usually favored uglier deaths. The boy crouched beside the corpse and studied the wound. Sharp blade, fast hand, no wasted motion. Interesting. He glanced up. Nothing moved, no spiritual pressure he could clearly define, no footsteps, no obvious threat. But the air felt different. Charged, in a way he could not explain. As though the district itself had become aware of something entering it and was waiting to see what would happen next. He stood slowly. The instinct that had kept him alive all these years whispered along his spine. Not fear. Not exactly. Attention. The kind that comes when a predator notices another predator nearby. He began walking again, more carefully now, his sword hanging loose in his hand. Night lowered itself over the district piece by piece. Shadows lengthened. Lanterns flickered to life in some windows, while others stayed dark because oil was scarce and fear cheaper. Somewhere distant, a woman shouted at someone to come inside. Somewhere else, laughter rose and cut off abruptly. The boy moved through it all like a quiet current, parting around trouble when it wasn't worth the trouble to enter it. Then the pressure touched him. He stopped in the middle of a narrow street lined with broken wooden structures and stone foundations half swallowed by time. It was subtle at first. Just a sensation in the air, as if the world had become denser. Then it deepened, pressing gently against skin and bone with a weight no ordinary fighter could produce. The boy's grip on his sword tightened. The pressure did not feel wild. It did not feel cruel. That made it worse. Cruelty was familiar. Wildness was simple. This felt calm, and calm power was always more dangerous. The wind shifted. At the far end of the street, a figure emerged from shadow, a woman. She walked without hurry. Long dark hair trailed behind her. Her clothes were clean despite the dust of the district, white over darker layers, elegant in a way that should have looked absurd there and somehow did not. Her face was composed, almost serene, the kind of face one might trust at a glance if one had never learned better. The boy did not trust at a glance. He stayed still and watched her approach. She came to a stop several yards away, close enough to speak, far enough not to insult him with overconfidence. Her eyes rested on him, then on the sword in his hand, then back on him again. Something about the look unsettled him more than the pressure had. She was not measuring whether she could kill him. She was measuring whether he would be enough. For the first time in a long while, the emptiness in his chest shifted, not filled, stirred. The woman smiled. It was a small thing, soft, refined, out of place in that broken street. Then she said, in a voice so gentle it took a second to feel the danger beneath it, "Fight me? No introduction. No explanation, no threat. Just that." The boy stared at her. He had seen mad people before. He had seen desperate people, cruel people, arrogant people, people so hollowed out by hardship they courted death simply to feel something. She was none of those. She was composed, certain, and somehow excited in a way so fate most would have missed it. "Why?" he asked. Her smile sharpened by a degree almost too slight to notice. "Because," she said, "I think you might be interesting." The district seemed to retreat around them. Sound thinned. The air tightened. The boy did not know her name. He did not know that long before she had become a healer wrapped in civility, the world had learned to fear her as Yakiru Unohana, the first and most terrible Kenpachi, a swordswoman who had spent centuries searching for a battle worthy of her blade. He did not know that countless warriors had died before her, too weak, too brittle, too disappointing. He did not know that she had come to the outer districts once more not out of duty, but because boredom had driven her to hunt for something stronger. He knew none of that. He knew only this. The woman standing before him was dangerous enough to make his blood wake up. And for the first time in years, maybe longer, he was not disappointed. He raised his sword. The corners of her mouth lifted. The pressure around her deepened, slow as a tide coming in. The boy felt his heart beat once, heavy and clean. Then she drew her blade. Steel whispered out into the darkening street. The sound was beautiful. Terrible. Perfect. The woman's eyes remained gentle. Her voice when she spoke again was almost warm. "Come," the boy moved, not because she told him to, because he wanted to know, would she break too? Would she bleed? Would she finally be different? Their blades met in the center of the broken street with a clash so sharp it seemed to split the evening apart. Sparks jumped between them. The force traveled up his arms and through his shoulders into his spine. Her strength was not simply greater than anyone he had fought before. It was cleaner. More complete. As if all the wasted movement and panic and desperation that usually shaped violence had been burned away long ago, leaving only skill and intent. The boy's feet slid half an inch over the dust-coated stone. Her feet did not move at all. Her eyes widened, only slightly, only enough to tell him that she had expected him to die faster. Then she laughed. Softly. A sound threaded with delight so genuine it unsettled him more than if she had screamed. Good, he thought, though he could not have said why. He twisted, broke away, and struck again. This time she met him lower, angling her blade to deflect and punish in the same breath. If he had fought like anyone else in the district, he would have lost his arm. Instead, he shifted on instinct, the cut grazing his sleeve rather than his flesh, and came back with a thrust aimed for the narrow opening beneath her ribs. She moved like water and stone at once, fluid, certain. Her blade slid his aside and nearly kissed his throat. He dropped, pivoted, felt the whisper of steel through the air above him. Too fast. His pulse quickened. Her smile widened. The street around them disappeared from his awareness. There was no district, no dust, no watching windows, no life beyond the reach of those blades. There was only movement, pressure, intent, and the cold, bright line between surviving and not. He had lived there all his life, but never like this. For the first time, survival did not feel ugly. It felt exhilarating. They exchanged another burst of strikes, faster now, each cut answered by another, each opening disappearing before it could be used. The boy's body learned as it fought. Her shoulder lowered before a horizontal slash. Her right foot settled harder when she committed to power. Her left wrist softened a fraction before changing angle. He took all of it in without naming it, his instincts absorbing her pattern even as it kept shifting just out of reach. And through it all, she watched him. Not with contempt, not with detached amusement, with joy. That was the strangest part. She was enjoying this, really enjoying it. He could feel it in the way her pressure sharpened, in the warmth hiding under her poise, in the occasional quiet exhale that sounded almost relieved. The realization ran through him like another kind of strike. So he pressed harder. His next attack came from higher than before, then cut abruptly low when she raised to meet it. The move was crude by any formal standard, but timed well enough to force a real adjustment. Steel scraped steel. Their faces came briefly close enough for him to see the change in her expression. Not surprise. Approval. His blade passed along the edge of her guard, close enough to disturb a strand of dark hair. Her eyes gleamed. "There you are," she murmured. He did not understand what she meant. He only knew he wanted to make her say something like that again. She came at him all at once. The pressure around her surged, not enough to crush him, but enough to reveal a hint of something vast and ancient behind her gentle face. Her sword became impossible then, a line of silver death cutting from angle after angle, forcing him backward for the first time in the fight. He blocked one. Slipped another, lost a shallow line of blood along his shoulder to the third. Pain flared. He smiled before he realized he was doing it. The woman saw, and laughed again, openly this time, delighted beyond concealment. Yes, that sound said. This is what I wanted. He did not know why that pleased him, but it did. Their blades crashed again, the impact driving dust and rings across the street. He felt the bite of her strength, the terrifying refinement of someone who had lived in battle long enough to become beautiful within it. Yet beneath the danger, beneath the certainty that she could kill him if he misstepped once, there was something else. She was not trying to end him. Not yet. She was testing him, measuring him, inviting him higher. The thought should have angered him. Instead, it sharpened his focus. He shifted his grip on the sword and attacked with everything he had. The street vanished entirely. There was only the duel. Only the strange woman who smiled when steel met steel, and whose presence felt like standing at the edge of a vast ocean under a black sky. Only the sensation of finding, at last, someone who did not crumble the moment he pushed. He did not know how long they fought. Time dissolved inside movement. His lungs burned. Blood ran warm down his arm. His muscles screamed from the effort of keeping pace with someone who should have been impossible. Still he kept moving. Still he adapted. Still he found again and again that thin instant before death where instinct lived. And then, an opening. Tiny. There, then gone. Except this time he reached it first. He slipped inside her guard on pure animal certainty, his sword turning with no formal elegance, only necessity and truth. The blade kissed her shoulder. A thin line opened in white cloth. Red followed. They broke apart. Silence crashed down between them. The boy stared. He had cut her. For a heartbeat, the woman looked at the blood on her shoulder as if it belonged to someone else. Then she touched it with 2 fingers, looked at the red there, and smiled in a way that made the night itself seem to tense. No softness remained in that smile. No civility. No healer's grace. Only a predator's joy. Wonderful, she whispered. The boy's pulse thundered. He should have been afraid. Maybe he was, but it was buried beneath something brighter. Because now he knew she could bleed. She was different. The woman lifted her gaze to him, eyes luminous in the deepening dark, and for the first time he saw the truth of her fully, not by name, not by history, but by instinct. This was not just another strong fighter. This was a monster, and somehow, so was he. The smile she gave him then was not kind, but it was not cruel either. It was recognition. "Come with me," she said. The words fell into the street between them. The boy blinked. "What?" She lowered her sword, though the danger in her did not lessen in the slightest. "You do not belong here." He almost laughed at that. Of course he belonged here. He belonged to broken roads and bad air and blood on dusty stone. He belonged to survival because survival was the only thing that had ever wanted him. As if reading something in his face, the woman tilted her head. "You're wasting yourself." The statement landed harder than any strike. The boy's grip tightened on his sword. "I live, yes," she said, "but poorly." He did not answer. The wind moved through the street. Somewhere distant, a roof tile shifted. The district watched from behind cracks and doors and broken windows, afraid to breathe too loudly. The woman took one slow step toward him. He did not retreat. "Fight me again," she said softly. "Tomorrow, the day after. For years, if you survive that long." His chest felt strange, empty still, but not in the same way. "You think I'll lose?" Her eyes softened with amusement. "Eventually." Something in him bristled. "Then why ask?" Her answer came without hesitation. "Because losing to me would still let you become more than this." The boy looked around at the district that had made him. The broken walls, the stained ground, the hungry dark. He had survived here by becoming sharp enough to cut anything that came near. But standing before this woman, with her impossible skill and blood still bright on her shoulder, he could feel the shape of another possibility for the first time. Not safety, not comfort, something rarer, a future with more fighting than he could imagine, with someone who might actually keep up. The thought alone made the hollow place in him tighten almost painfully. "What if I say no?" he asked. The woman smiled again, smaller now, calmer. "Then I will leave," she said, "and one day you will realize what you refused." The certainty in her voice bothered him because he believed her. He looked at the cut he had made, at the blood drying slowly on white fabric, at the woman who had smiled because of it. Then back at the district. He understood survival. He had mastered it. What he did not understand was why, suddenly, it felt too small. The woman sheathed her blade in one smooth motion. The sound echoed in the night like the end of something, or the start. She turned as if to go. The boy spoke before he could stop himself. "If I come..." She looked over her shoulder. "Yes?" He searched for the only part that mattered. "Will we fight?" The woman's expression changed, softened strangely. Not into gentleness exactly, but into something near it. "Oh yes," she said. For a very long time. The answer settled the question. The boy looked once more at the streets that had raised him with fists and knives and hunger. Then he looked at the woman whose blood he had drawn and whose smile had not dimmed because of it. He took a step, then another. He fell into place behind her, not out of submission, not yet, but because instinct told him this was the right direction to follow. The woman began walking. He followed. The district watched them go, the silent stray and the smiling monster in white, moving together into the night. No one called out. No one tried to stop them. Perhaps some understood, dimly, that something had changed in the balance of the world, even if they could not have said how. The boy did not know where she was taking him. He did not know her name. He did not know that one day the world would call her Retsu Unohana and whisper older names with fear. He did not know that he was leaving behind not just a district, but a life shaped entirely by desperation. He did not know what waited inside the walls of Sirite, or how many years of blood and steel stretched ahead. He only knew one thing with absolute certainty. For the first time in his life, he was no longer walking toward survival. He was walking toward something stronger. And in the dark ahead of them, where the road bent toward the future, the first Kenpachi smiled to herself like a woman who had finally found what she had been hunting for. Behind her, the nameless boy walked in silence, sword at his side, eyes fixed forward. The night closed around them, and somewhere deep inside both of them, something ancient and lonely stirred awake. It had finally found an answer, or at least the beginning of one.